Hey, good morning, Juan, or good morning, Kerry.
Ed, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Michael.
Good morning, Counselor. This is Juan.
Good morning, Juan.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Kerry here. Ready to go when you are, sir.
Okay, Superintendent McGoldrick is on. Chris English from Inspectional Services is on. Okay, I'm going to begin. The meeting. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending. This is City Council hearing. My name is Ed Flynn, and I'm the chair of the Committee on City and Neighborhood Services. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on boston.gov/citycouncil-tv. It will also be rebroadcast at a later time on Xfinity 8 RCN 82 Fios 964. Anyone that would like to testify in this matter, please email juan.lopez@boston.gov for the Zoom link. Today's hearing is on docket number 0639. In order for a hearing to discuss increasing fines for large house parties disturbing neighbors' quality of life. This matter is sponsored by myself and at-large City Councilor Michael Flaherty. It was referred to the Committee on City and Neighborhood Services on May 5th, 2021. I'd like to offer an opening statement and then hand it over to Councilor Flaherty and my colleagues as well. Then the panelists, as I mentioned, Superintendent McGoldrick and Chris English from Inspectional Services for their opening statement. And we'll also take public testimony. We filed this hearing order because we have heard and we have seen literally hundreds of neighbors that are outraged over these huge house parties in South Boston and other neighborhoods across the city. As many of you on here or watching recall, Councilor Flaherty and I called for a hearing on this issue in the fall. At that time, we tried to sound the alarm on the potential for COVID-19 super spreader event, as public health officials repeatedly warned that young people were driving the rise in COVID cases. We also talked about the quality of life issues they present for neighbors. But we also want to emphasize today that although this behavior increased during the pandemic and with our bars at limited capacity, this lack of respect for neighbors has been going on for years, and enough is enough. Every Thursday to Sunday in South Boston, it is now like Mardi Gras or St. Patrick's Day weekend, with 600 calls from Southie alone in one weekend recently to the Boston Police Department. 2 weeks ago, I went on a drive around with a member of the community CSO from C6 down in West Broadway. And the calls that were coming into this office's radio for house parties was nonstop. I went with her to many house parties. She was an outstanding professional officer, but the calls continued and continued. As much as many who comment online are hoping that reopening our bars and restaurants to full capacity will solve the problem, neighbors who have been here for less years know that it will be a huge issue prior to COVID-19, and that was only exacerbated. And it will continue to be a major problem unless we take specific concrete steps to address it. How many after parties or late night parties will we see now in the coming months with young people ready to break out from the pandemic? It's outrageous. Young people, many young people, I should say, have very little respect for our seniors, for persons with disabilities, for young families that are trying to get their kids to sleep so that they can be productive in the morning for school. Very selfish for people to be doing that. Hundreds of neighbors on Zoom, phone calls, emails, whether they be longtime neighbors or young families that have moved to Southie. They have all told me and Councilor Flaherty that they've had it and literally dread every weekend coming due to the huge parties of 40, 50 people all day and night, every Saturday. Public urination, pizza boxes, beer cans, trash all over their streets and property. This lack of common courtesy is indefensible. Many have said they are considering leaving Boston as a result. And the people that are having this party, they might be from New York, they might be from Connecticut, they might be from New Jersey. They wouldn't do this at their parents' home, but they come to my neighborhood and act disrespectful. Time and again, we're finding it's renters from absentee landlords who want to extend their college frat party days at all hours while showing blatant disrespect for the neighbors next door at the expense of young families with babies and small children. As I mentioned, our seniors, persons with disabilities. The neighbors that help to build this city, that live here and contribute to the community, that are paying increased property taxes while dealing with more quality of life issues. They've had enough and they deserve a little peace and quiet and to be treated with respect and dignity. And let me add, these seniors help build our city. They help build our country. Many of them are veterans. So we filed this hearing order to discuss increasing fines substantially for large house parties and ways to provide stricter enforcement rules regarding larger house parties in the city's noise ordinance. It has to go beyond COVID. It has not, and it's not going to stop otherwise. And Governor Baker's orders, including the potential for a civil fine of up to $500. However, despite this warning and public health guidelines, we know that large house parties continue all over the city. Residents have been advised to report large parties to the Boston Police Department at 911. Over recent months, it had helped trigger the Inspectional Service Department investigation and enforcement team to collaborate with BPD, review the properties and potentially place them on the city's problem properties list, and to issue a $500 fine, with the owner of the property required to address these violations. I want to thank Jessica Thomas, Flavio DeViga. Thank you, Flavio, and their team for their efforts, warning 13 property owners at the time in Southie. But $500 is not enough. Boston should also look to issue increasing fines, perhaps at $1,000 the first offense, and explore $2,000 for a second offense, and the third for $3,000 for those that repeatedly violate the city noise ordinance. It's critical that the city of Boston get a handle on this and look to increase the fines for those who violate state and city regulation so that we can keep our neighborhood peaceful, healthy, and clean. Again, I want to thank everyone for their work on a difficult issue, but we also need to have more resources as well to focus solely on this. I am also advocating for the creation of a point person with the city to act as a liaison with the City of Boston Police Department, Inspectional Services Department, Office of Neighborhood Services, the Problem Properties Task Force, and elected officials. I envision that position accumulating this data coming from neighborhoods, from neighbors to all relevant offices, providing helpful information to neighbors about this issue, sending warning notices to the landlords and tenants, helping to check against our master problem properties list to see if this behavior rises to that level and requires further actions and fines. I can assure my colleagues there will be no shortage of work across the city on this issue. I want to thank my friend and neighbor, Councilor Flaherty, for his leadership on this issue. I want to say thank you to the Boston Police Department. They've done a very good job, as have Inspectional Services. Captain Boyle has done a very good job in his team at C6. I look forward to continuing to working with Councilor Flaherty, Boston Police, ISD, ONS, Haley Dillon has as well, neighbors and civic organizations on this issue. But let me be clear, we're not going to tolerate this anymore in South Boston. In the days of partying for people till 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, keeping elderly people up, keeping persons with disabilities, children that are trying to get to school, they're over. And don't be so selfish that you need to party at the expense of people that helped build this city. Long when Boston wasn't the world-class city it was a working class city that welcomed everybody, especially our working families. And don't be rude and don't be insensitive by your outrageous behavior. At this time, I'd like to ask my colleague, Councilor Michael Flaherty, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and well said. I'd like to begin this hearing by thanking the many South Boston residents who have consistently reached out to my office via phone and email to advocate for this hearing today that we're having. And to those residents, I want you to know that we hear you and that this hearing is a direct result of your dedicated advocacy. What has become the status quo of nonstop, over-the-top partying is not acceptable. And between my colleagues on the council and the folks that we have from the administration on this panel today, I'm confident that we can identify the right changes that need to be made to curb the problem. Also, as an at-large councilor, I want to be clear that I recognize this problem is not contained to South Boston. Residents in other neighborhoods like Mission Hill, Alston Brighton, the North End, just to name a few, and others, are dealing with similarly out of control parties. The solutions discussed today, I would envision being applied across the city and can hopefully help residents in other neighborhoods as well to restore some order, peace, and quiet to their lives. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your staff for their dedicated work to coordinate today's hearing, along with my team, as well as our panelist, Superintendent Kevin McGoldrick from the Boston Police Department, who had lived in South Boston for a period of time, along with Chris English, Chief of Staff for Inspectional Services. And I know that Jess and Fabio are on as well. And I know that we're working around the clock on this as well. So I look, as we look forward to the summer, and also recognize that almost all statewide COVID-19 restrictions are being lifted tomorrow. We also have the Celtics and the Bruins are in the playoffs, and the Sox are back up and running. It is absolutely critical that we secure a transparent, efficient, impactful, and accessible strategy that residents can trust, will temper the chaos, and that that they're forced to endure almost every single night in their neighborhood. So I look forward to standing with the community today and amplifying their voices over the never-ending racket of disruptive house parties that have taken over in the neighborhoods, and we'll work with the police department and the administration staff. And just want it noted, as Councilor and Chairman Flynn knows, that unfortunately I'm joining by phone due to I'm traveling to a funeral. My high school classmate and college roommate, and also my goalie's mother, passed away, and so I'm en route to a noontime funeral. So I'm going to be on as long as I can. My staff will be on for the duration, but I'll reconvene, obviously, and double back with you and Superintendent McGoldrick and Chris English to ascertain next steps. But just want to let my neighbors know that that we hear you loud and clear, and we're going to do the best we can to start to take control of this issue and start to hit the host, the party host, and the homeowners where it probably will get their attention, which is in their pocket, in their wallet. So. Thank you, Chairman Flynn, and look forward to the testimony.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. At this time, I would like to ask Police Superintendent McGoldrick if he'd like to open up with an opening statement.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, and thank you, Councilor Flaherty. for having me here at this hearing. Obviously, this is a huge concern for the community, and it's a concern for the police as well, because it's extraordinarily taxing on our resources. As you mentioned, Councilor Flynn, a recent weekend, there were several hundred calls just in South Boston for loud parties. I mean, we're embarking on the unofficial beginning of summer this weekend, and so far, year to date, we have over 10,000 disturbance calls citywide. We have over almost 4,200 of those related to loud music, and about 2,400 were related to loud parties. And as I said, it's, Memorial Day weekend, it hasn't even arrived yet. So that doesn't bode well for this coming summer. Obviously, last summer was a huge issue with disturbance calls and fireworks. Hopefully we won't deal with the firework issue to the extent that we had last year, but the loud parties seem to be unabated at this point. I think personal responsibility, as you mentioned, Councilor Flynn, is somewhat lacking with people who are engaging with this. And I'm not obviously painting people with a broad brush. There are plenty of people who move to the city and work hard and do the right thing, and take ownership of the city, regardless of the fact that they've only been here for a short time. But certainly we do see a huge influx in certain neighborhoods of people that come here and do want to exacerbate the party atmosphere. No one's trying to stop people from having fun, but the reality is, especially when you get to the late night hours, we need to respect each other. And unfortunately, when that becomes a police problem, it's challenging. I mean, we don't want to be, we don't want to be seen as trying to instill, some sort of restrictive process on people. We don't want to be fining people. We certainly don't want to be arresting people or criminally charging people just because they get carried away for a night with a party. But the reality is that residents all around them are demanding action, and it's our responsibility to respond to what the residents want and to apply the law as best we can. We do often try to warn people, and I think the majority of the time when people realize that they've created such a disturbance that their neighbors have called the police, the majority of the time people will respond to that and shut it down. When it gets to the point where people don't care or won't listen to the police and it gets contentious, I think you're correct that some of the fines may not be sufficient for people to take this seriously, especially repeat offenders. I mean, anyone can have a party get out of control once, and then realize they shouldn't have done that. But when people are repeat problem properties or repeat places where parties go on and people don't seem to care, obviously the relatively small fines, whether it's for the city ordinance or the state laws and disturbing the peace, are apparently not doing the job. So, and I think it's more appropriate to hit the people that are hosting these events and causing the problems, but certainly the people that own these properties have a role to play as well. So, I think, I think that the city council's initiatives are well targeted to the problem, and I hope for the city and for the offices that are out there that are just overwhelmed with some of these calls, which. It's not that the officers are working too hard. It's that they're not doing other things that the community might see as more valuable. If we reduce some of these calls and we reduce some of these responses to disturbances, and it's not just South Boston. Obviously, around Franklin Fields, Franklin Park, we have a lot of parties outside that we try to address. We've had a pretty well-established plan already this year to try to address some of the neighbors' concerns of loud music. That the people in those neighborhoods that call and report on a regular basis that they can't sleep, they have to get up there. There's a lot of hardworking people in the city who, even if it's a Saturday, are getting up in the morning and going to work, and this is having an impact on their quality of life, and they shouldn't have to tolerate it. And I think other tools that might help us be more effective would probably be beneficial. So, obviously we've got a great relationship with Inspection Services, and if we can continue that relationship with some additional tools, I think that'll be useful. And I think that, as far as the property owners go, if they have an opportunity to have a discussion with the people that are renting their properties, and potentially if the property owners get fined, perhaps an ability to pass those fines on to them through withholding security deposit funds or whatever, I think probably puts the onus on both of them. That there's obviously some provisions within the ordinance that once they start legal proceedings, then some of these penalties are tolled against the property owners. And I think that's useful, but maybe some kind of expedited process for people that just won't listen and won't conform to community standards. Perhaps an expedited means of getting them out of that property might be appropriate as well. But thank you for having me here, and I look forward to being an increased part of the solution.
Thank you, Superintendent McGoldrick. We're also joined by City Councilor Lydia Edwards from East Boston. Chris English, Chief of Staff, Inspectional Services. Would you like to give an opening statement, please?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Edwards, and the rest of the council for having me here. Just want to give a brief statement just to say, the Inspectional Services Department enforces the state's building and sanitary codes, which cover anything from conditions inside a property to the way it's built or the way it's being used. We work really closely with the Boston Police Department to investigate complaints related to buildings and how they're being occupied. Our investigation and enforcement team is comprised of building and housing inspectors, as well as our constituent services division with liaisons from the Boston Police Department, the Fire Department, and the Boston Public Health Commission. Over the past year, particularly during COVID, when there were additional powers granted to municipal authorities to enforce gatherings orders, our investigation and enforcement team was out across the city responding to complaints about large gatherings. We investigated nearly 100 incidents over that time period and issued a variety of enforcement measures, from warning letters to formal notices of violations to fines, which are effective in some respects, but as we see and as you've highlighted, parties continue to be a problem in South Boston and across the city. The Inspectional Services Department is also one of the primary members of the city's Problem Properties Task Force, of which I've sat on for the past 9.5 years. The Problem Properties Task Force does have some elevated enforcement measures that it can take to serious problem properties, primarily through the enforcement of fines against property owners. And while we recognize that many of the issues, particularly with house parties, loud gatherings, disturbances, are often perpetrated by tenants, many of our enforcement tools are specific to the property itself and the property owner. While that's helpful in some respects, because it can sort of inspire action against the landlord, I think there's a lot of work that can be done to address issues at the tenant level. And as the primary responding agency for issues, the Boston Police Department, when responding to parties, if there are issues identified that may be a violation of the building or the housing code, they will call our 24-hour on-call inspectors to come out and investigate, and which have resulted in fines and violations being written for building issues or sanitary code issues. So, but we are more than happy to continue working with the council, the police department, and our other colleagues in the fire department and the Public Health Commission to address the issues. We're open to creative solutions. Happy to hear your thoughts and see how we can move forward.
Thank you, Chris. As I mentioned, we are also joined by City Councilor Lydia Edwards. Councilor Edwards, would you like to give an opening statement?
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. And I want to thank again the co-sponsors, the lead sponsors, excuse me, Councilor Flynn and I believe Councilor Flaherty for this hearing and this really important conversation. I actually just had a great conversation with Rep. Holmes, And he also is concerned about the amount of parties that are going on and how loud they are. I understand we live in a city, but we live in communities first. We live in neighborhoods first, and people are, you're allowed to have a certain amount of liberty and freedom within your own home. But when your noise impacts my quality of life, the cleanliness of the streets, and your that's when, unfortunately, we have to come in and talk about these things. So along with the looking at the increase in fines, which do go to the property owners, right? In many cases, that's the tenants who are doing this. I also think we should look at how we're measuring noise. And honestly, I mean, this is coming from a constituent, but he's wondering if the noise ordinance as it stands, which I think is 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., whether that we should be allowing certain decibels that late. His suggestion is, couldn't we consider a 9 p.m. cutoff for certain decibel levels versus the 11 p.m. one? And I told him I'd bring it up, and honestly, I wonder if that makes sense, because he's, in his mind, 11 p.m. is really saying midnight, let's be honest. And 9 p.m. is probably really saying closer to 10 or 11 anyway. So maybe we should consider an enforcement. I know with fines, we might have to go to the state house, but in terms of the time, we might be able to do that in our house. That's one thing. And then I think, for him, he was just, for him and for some people, they were a little irate because it's 70 decibels, I think it is, for, if it goes over 70 or 50. And how is the average person supposed to measure what the heck that means? You don't really know, right? You just know it's so loud you can't sleep. And so how are we really, and then I went to the website, and there were some real life examples: lawn mowers, construction hours are really good too. I think you might want to consider maybe shortening them, but those are things that I think we can do in-house. I don't know if there's an app on a phone that you could use to measure decibels. You're nodding your head, Chris. Is there an app? I don't know. But I think in terms of enforcing and defining what's loud and how long we let people be loud is important. And I'm not anti-partying. I enjoy a good gathering. I enjoy coming together and having a good time. So no one's saying you can't have your fun until the wee hours of the morning. What we're saying is, when your fun is so loud that it impacts my ability to sleep, and when we, you may have to close your windows, and you may have to lower the volume of your, your music. That's all. That's what I came here to say. I think that's what you, Councilor Flynn and Flaherty, are also saying too. We enjoy a good party. We just need people to be able to sleep when they want to.
Thank you.
Councilor Flynn, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Edwards. And this issue, district councilors really understand this issue, because these are the issues we focus on, because our constituents call us and they email us and they text us. They have our cell phone numbers, and we're active in the neighborhood. We can't duck these issues. The buck stops with us at the district level. So we need a solution to this. And if this doesn't work for the residents of Boston, that they can't sleep at night, then nothing works for them. And then they make a decision, or they debate about a decision with their family about leaving the city if we're not able to solve this. So this is an important issue, and we need to get a comprehensive plan that works for residents. I'm going to hold off on my questioning. I'm going to let Councilor Flaherty go first, and then I'll ask Councilor Edwards, and then I'll do my questioning. We'll also take public testimony. But Councilor Flaherty, do you want to start your questioning?
You're right. Actually, just in fairness to all the attendees, I'm happy to go right to questions from our neighbors and from the residents. Quite frankly, they're
okay.
They know the issue better than anybody. So
okay.
Refer to them. I ideally would love to have Superintendent McGoldrick and the BPD walk us through sort of exactly what the process is when a resident calls BPD and or 311 with respect to a loud party, as evidenced by our conversations recently with Captain Boyle. They're just inundated down in 6. And obviously we would argue and would like to maybe Superintendent McGoldrick could assist in getting us more officers to 6 to sort of handle this issue. But I guess how does BPD determine which parties are responded to first? And how do we know and ensure that the party will not reform or regroup once the officers depart and go to their next call? And I think that's kind of the cat and mouse that's going on in the community, is that people will call either 311, 911, the officers show and kind of put a lid on it for a little bit. Maybe the party breaks up for a little bit and they head up to Broadway and they kind of get their groove on for a little bit, and then they return a couple hours later and it's and game is back on again. So I would like to kind of get a sense as that, but relatively, that's the frustrating piece, I think, and then defer it to public comments for the folks that are taking time out of their Friday on a long holiday weekend to be here to express their concerns and frustration.
Yeah, that makes sense, Michael. Why don't we go to the superintendent and then to Chris on Michael's question, and then after that we'll go to public testimony.
Thank you. Yeah, so basically the 911 or the call to the party line gets a response kind of in order. 911's probably the most common way that we get these calls, and generally if it's a party call, a disturbance call, it's all given the same priority. So it's basically taken essentially in order of arrival at the dispatch center. We do have a finite number of officers working. The last half, the after midnight shift is the lightest, but we do get a lot of these calls towards the end of the first half shift up to 11:45. So, we generally have a pretty reasonable response. Obviously, when we have a very busy weekend, it does overwhelm us and cause our response to particular addresses to be delayed. But the reality is, we do the best we can, and we find a pretty fair amount of compliance. We do find people that just don't care and will, as mentioned, start the party right back up as soon as the police leave, and that's when we go back and we make people leave the house, and we find people, or we take out criminal complaints, which we did last weekend to a number of addresses. So that's pretty much the process. 311 is not as much of a real-time solution. That's more of a, you send an email into 311 and we kind of track that as it's a problem that keeps coming up, but it's the real-time issue is basically dispatched from our operations center to 911. So across the city, it's a challenge to keep up with on busy weekends. Regarding getting some more officers out there, we do have a class coming out of 94 officers. So we will plus up a little bit. When you look at the various districts and the various shifts, it doesn't add 94 officers gets absorbed pretty quickly into the department without a huge noticeable increase, but it's still something. So we'll definitely have a few more people in South Boston, a few more people in B2 and B3 to respond to these kind of calls. But yeah, that's basically the process. We go out there, and if a warning seems to clear everything out, then that's great. But if it's a problem that we've been back to this address a number of times, or it's every other weekend, or the officers get the impression that people aren't going to take it seriously, then we stand by and try to empty it out as much as we can, and either fine or criminally charge the people in charge, and then follow up with ISD in situations where it's really over the top.
Chris English, you're up next.
I would say Superintendent McGoldrick said, for activity, 911 is the way to go. I think parties that often involve two different aspects of city involvement, activity and conditions. So if there's party activity happening and we need a real-time response, 911 would be the way to go with the Boston Police to report conditions, whether it's overcrowding or unsafe conditions, possibly illegal conditions at the property. 311 is the way to go for ISD, unless the police ask us to come out sort of in the field at the time. 311 would be the way to go. We have a 24-hour on-call staff that can respond. But all those calls are tracked through the 311 system and dispatched that way. And generally speaking, conditions, poor conditions of property or unsafe conditions of property generally are there in the daytime too. So we do respond in the overnight hours, but we also go out and investigate and inspect during the day.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Superintendent. I'm going to go right to public testimony. One, I'm going to start with Ellie, who offered to give an opening statement or public testimony, I should say. Ellie, are you with us?
Hold on. Hi, Ed, I'm here. Yeah, I sent a letter to Juan. There are a couple of properties I've called on, and things branch out from the parties. Saturday afternoon on Broadway is like the Vegas Strip. This is a community, as Councilor Edwards said. This is a community. This is a neighborhood. It's not a college campus. It's not a frat house. It's not a resort. And it's just out of control. And I love the idea of making the ordinance 9 p.m. if that can be done. I really love that idea. I also think fining the tenants as well as the landlords. And definitely, we do need to go after these landlords. They buy a property, they rent it out. They're not even from South Boston or Boston. They live in Newton and Middleton and wherever, and they sleep at night. And I'm dealing with their people. And I really strongly feel $500 is not enough. I think $1,000 the first loud party, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. The tenants get kicked out. There's a lien on the property, just whatever you can do. I think we really need to strike hard. And this isn't just from COVID. I grew up here. This has been going on the last 5, 6, 7 years. Mm-hmm. These people have absolutely no respect. There's trash everywhere. There's dog poop everywhere. I don't know where they grew up. And like you said, Ed, they don't do this in Connecticut or Schenectady or even Southborough, Westborough, whatever borough out in Western Mass. They don't do that there. So why are you doing it in my neighborhood? And thank you all for listening, and thank you for bringing this about, because it's time. And not just here. I know the folks in Franklin Park are having issues. I know Eastie, I worked for the school department in Eastie for a couple of years, and I know that's starting to get the same way. It just, enough is enough.
Thank you, Ellie. I think your comments are excellent. Mm-hmm. You're right. This has been going on for 7 years in this town.
Yeah,
it's been going on across the city for a long period of time, and people have had it. And you are right. These young people that are living in South Boston, they wouldn't do it in New York. They wouldn't do it in Connecticut. Their parents wouldn't tolerate it. But they can come here, drink alcohol, throw cans around, throw pizza boxes on the ground, and show a complete disregard for the residents in the city. And it's unfair, and it's selfish, to be honest with you. Selfish behavior. Let me go to the next person that is providing public testimony. And if you raise your hand, is there a Jim Bacata? Okay. Kristen DeVoy. Can we go to Kristen DeVoy? Juan, can we go to Kristen DeVoy?
Anyone in the waiting room, you ask them to raise their hands and call on them and Carrie can let them in.
Okay,
You check the ones that have their hands raised.
I'm here. Sorry, I don't know what happened.
okay, you're on, Kristen.
Okay. Well, first I want to say thank you to Ed and Michael. They've been really helpful dealing with this issue. About a month ago, I started seeing a lot of elderly disabled neighbors voicing their concerns and how upset they've been about this particular issue. And I began connecting with them and asking them to share their experience with me, because it broke my heart. Like, many of these residents have been in this community for years and they're being told to just move or wear earplugs. And it just got to the point where I felt like I had to, step in and help them out. And the stories I've heard about the things that they're experiencing are absolutely horrifying. I mean, there's the noise, but then there's like the public urination, the defecating on other people's property. And it's just like mind blowing. I actually compiled like a whole list and had them tell me exactly what they did. They call 911, they send an email to you guys. And it's just, it blows my mind to see the amount of properties that are being called on and the amount of times they're being called on. And there's no, currently it feels like there's no consequence because it's continuing. There's many repeat offenders. And I have looked into the owners of these properties, and many of them register as LLCs, and they live nowhere near here. Many of them are absentee landlords. A lot of the residents have tried to connect with these landlords just to give them a fair chance and say, hey, can you talk to your tenants? And they've been ignored. Now, just last weekend, one of our elderly neighbors was accosted by one of these tenants because she had called 911 on them. The tenant came over and started screaming at a 63-year-old woman. And my fear is someone's going to end up getting hurt if things don't change, because this behavior and this attitude they have is just something I've never seen before. I've lived here for all my 32 years, and I've honestly never seen anything like it. The disrespect for, our senior citizens, our disabled, our veterans, the people who have built this community. They've made this community, and they want to move. They want to leave. They don't want to do it anymore. They're calling me crying. They're literally crying because some of them are on hospice, some of them are sick, some of them are dying. They can't sleep. And it completely breaks my heart, because I want to stay here. I want to raise my daughter here, but it's become extremely difficult for all of us to have a good quality of life here. And we don't want that. We want to stay. We really do. And I really hope that these fines can be passed, because I don't think the tenants actually care. I think most of them are here for probably a year, then they move somewhere else. And, that they're not a part of our community in the sense where they actually care about their neighbors. So I don't think handing them a fine is effective, because I think they'd probably laugh and throw it away, because they're not going to be there long. I think hitting the landlords where it hurts is where we're going to see effective change, because then they may say, oh, maybe I should put in my lease agreement that there's no partying. And if there's partying, then they're going to be evicted. So
Okay.
I absolutely support, I'm 100% behind your effort. And I thank you so, so much for everything you've done. You've been amazing. You've been working with me. You've been meeting with me. And I just want to let you know that I truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for your leadership in the community. Next up is Terry. Terry, if you want, if you can unmute yourself, you're up next.
Turn this panel. Yeah, I think I unmuted myself.
Okay, you're all set, Terry. Go ahead.
Okay,
please.
so I have listened to the testimony of Chris English and the superintendent as well. Part of the problem I've noticed is, just on this side of it, the police response is pretty pathetic, to be honest. I mean, officers may show up 3.5 hours after calls are made. We understand there's possibly more issues that are taking place throughout the city, because I'm over in Fort Hill, Highland Park area. And so I've called numerous times, and my neighbors have called multiple times on the same 7 fraternity houses. Officers have been out, inspectional services have been out. Part of the other problem is Northeastern University, these are their students. Northeastern has taken a pretty pathetic head in the sand attitude and said, we are not going to do anything about these students. We can't touch these students, et cetera, et cetera. And it creates a bigger headache because the students realize we're not going to get in trouble with the schools. So therefore, what do we care? I look at it and say, you know, you could increase the fines to $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. However, if the police are coming out and they're not taking reports, which leads to how these fines get issued, then we're sitting there saying, well, we're just calling the police. What can we get the officers to do to actually file these reports so that these issues can be visually seen by someone higher up to say, this is a problem property? Because that's one of the main concerns I've had, literally with the tenants next door to me and throughout my neighborhood.
Well, thank you, Terry. Let me give an opportunity for Superintendent McGoldrick to respond. Thank you, Terry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think if it's a frequent problem, I'd be surprised if there aren't reports being taken, and you know, particularly if it's a Northeastern students that are there, because we usually have a pretty good relationship with the Northeastern administration and their police department. We've even had joint patrols during, you know, particularly high, you know, high volume party instances in Mission Hill. So I'd be surprised if there aren't reports being taken. As far as the delayed response, you know, there's unfortunately party calls aren't going to be a top priority if there are, you know, crime scenes and other violence taking place, which unfortunately does occur from time to time. So yeah, the party calls won't be the top priority, and if we're overwhelmed call wise, it will take some time to get there. You know, ideally we'd get there quickly enough for people to be able to you know, see some improvement and get to sleep. Maybe, you know, maybe the 9 o'clock rollback would be worthwhile in that respect. You know, if we get a call at 9, even if we are delayed by an hour or more, we'd still be there well before the current cutoff in most evenings. But yeah, I'll take a look. I'll reach out to the community service officer, which if you haven't engaged with the B2 community service officer, I would definitely do that and put that on his radar as well, because in addition to taking reports for ongoing incidents, they can engage with Northeastern University and with these fraternities directly and let them know exactly what the ramifications are. And you know, I agree, if they're not stopping for a few $100s, is making a fine of 500 or 1,000 going to change their attitude if it's funded by, you know, a bunch of people in a fraternity house? I'm not sure, but I think it's worth a try anyhow.
Thank you, Superintendent. Let me go to Mark McKunes. Will be up next. And before Mark goes, I received a text from a friend. He passed along to me that the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, which many of us know pretty well, they hand out tickets to tenants by noise control officers, which are civilian positions, and it has a immediate impact. So maybe that's also something Chris English can address at the next opportunity. But let me go right to Mark McKunes. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Eddie. Just want to say thank you guys for everything you're doing right now. I feel like I'm seeing a little bit of changes, and my neighbors are starting to cut back, around 11 o'clock. They're getting quieter, but they're still partying. But I do know other areas of the neighborhood are getting pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to piggyback on what the other counselor was saying about cutting the time back to 9 o'clock. I do think, that is kind of, that's 9 o'clock is a good hour, maybe 10, kind of meet them in the middle, man. Because it still gives them their time to have their good time. Everybody wants to relax on a Friday after work. So I kind of see both sides, but there's got to be a cutoff. 11 o'clock is late because it goes into midnight, but 10 o'clock would be about an 11 o'clock shutoff time. Also, it's like one of those situations, Eddie, you live up there near my mother. These people don't have any respect. My mother was battling cancer last year. And when the new tenants had moved in last summer and they started partying, my mother walked over there. You could see it in her face what she's dealing with, expressed, her health issues to them, and requested that they, kind of keep it down after a certain hour. And they completely ignored her. She reached out to that landlord. He owns 2 units right there on that street. She reached out to him. My brother and myself have reached out to him on multiple occasions during that time, and they just didn't really care. So I think giving them a hefty fine is for the landlord is a great idea. But I also think that the tenants or the person who's renting that Airbnb or renting that room, they need to be hit as well, because if you're just hitting the tenants, they're taking off in a couple of months anyways. They don't care. But then the landlords don't care just as much. Like I said, we had tried speaking to them on a civil manner and came to the point where cops were getting called almost every night. C6 is getting taxed. They've only got so many officers to deal with so many problems. So, some parties they don't get to until, like the other gentleman said, 3 hours later. So I don't know if we need to discuss something as a city to find some kind of other enforcement agency to step out. I know, back in the 90s, early 90s, we had the Boston Municipal Police. We had all, other types of police departments that worked on specific issues. If we can bring something like that back, so C6 isn't just dealing with, house parties all weekend. They're actually dealing with other shootings that's going on in Southie and stabbings, and can actually deal with the real crime. So you have an enforcement working on, taking care of these house parties. So if there's anything we can do about that, that would be great, or something we can think about in the near future. Other than that, Eddie, you're doing a great job. I'm very vocal about how I feel about things being done. And I really appreciate the efforts you and the ISD and everybody are doing for our city. So keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for joining us. It's good recommendations that you had. I'm going to continue on to, again, if you want to speak, please raise your hand. But I'm going to go to mayso. mayso, I think you might have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, mayso.
Okay, great. Hi. Yeah, I just have I just want to speak because I live on West 3rd Street between F and Dorchester Street. And as you know, the 4 bars that are surrounding that block, as I said, we have new neighbors next door to us. They've been here about a year, and numerous police calls to them, and they just don't care. They have a garage and they park on the sidewalk. I've called the police about that because people are walking up the street. They have to go out into the street. And at the end of March, they had a big party and went from Thursday night to Sunday. And when I called the police about the car parking, and we called them over the parties, but they have like a nest on their door, so they don't have a bell. So when the police come, they can't gain access to their house because they have it like they have like a gate now, and there's no way that they can get into the property. I've had the police come into my yard and look up and see the group there, but it's just nothing that they can do, they say. And the one time that the gentleman, I think his parents own the house or he's the owner, it's kind of, they don't really tell you the truth. He came down and he said, well, it was my birthday. And he said, tell the mayor to open the bars. And I said, well, the bars are open, but they're not open until 4 a.m. when your parties are continuing. And he just turned around. The police officer was right there. He turned around and said, just give me a fine, and slammed the door. So there's no use talking to him. But also, I mean, I'm grateful for these meetings taking place, and also the noise level that comes from these 4 bars, the foot traffic on West 3rd Street. You know, they leave the bars at night, they go into the parking lot if they don't have the Ubers blocking off the street. They continue to party in the parking lot, and it's just out of control. And, you know, you're home for the weekend, and come Thursday afternoon, you're getting nauseous because you're saying, all right, what time am I going to get to bed tonight? You know, you should probably go to bed at like 6 in the morning or something. But I just, as I said, the noise level on this block is out of control from the foot traffic for all the bars, and they don't have any respect for anybody. They don't respect their own property. The weekend trash, I mean, the trash is all over the street, White Claws, boxes. I mean, when they have the trash, they don't even put it in a barrel. So if the trashmen come and get it, it's all blown all over the street. So I want to thank you for listening. I know the police have a lot to deal with, and I know they prioritize the calls, which is justifiable, but sometimes like they have to come back twice. And what do you do when they can't get access to the house? I mean, can they put the blue lights on? I mean, years ago when, you know, you'd see the blue lights, you'd run because you knew the police were coming. But now I don't know if they can put the blue lights on. Can they not bang on the door? Like, you know, like my brother's gone over there a couple of times and banged on the door, and the kid came out and he said, you know, he wanted to show him. He said, this is my bedroom. Hear that noise? You know, but it's like every weekend there's 2 units, and then there's 4 other houses that right side by side. So if it's not one party, it's the next one. And like, you know, as I said, I've just about had it. Like I said, you don't want to say that word. We used to always call it beautiful world, but not so much anymore. But thank you, councilors, for listening. The police and the ISD just trying to address the problem. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, mayso. Thank you for your recommendations. I see Luann also from South Boston. Luann, I think you might have to unmute yourself. You're up next.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I want to thank you very much for hosting this meeting, Councilor Flynn, along with Flaherty and the other members of the City Council. We in South Boston at this point are in a crisis situation for many issues, but this being a main issue. So with that being said, I'd also like to bring up that when you have absentee landlords that are renting out all 3 floors of a triple decker, all 3 of those floors are co-joining and having one big massive party. And that's an issue as well. So last weekend, for instance, I called the police on 4 different properties just within my street. And that's not okay. The decibel level is a good idea, but we were also told that there is no cutoff time. If there is a decibel level, you know, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then it's okay to call the police at that time as well. I'd like to see those fines increased, and I do believe that hitting the tenants is not effective. It's got to be the homeowners. And if the homeowners cannot keep control of their rental property, then they deserve to be hit. They need to keep control of their house. They need to make sure it does not become a disorderly house. So if that's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, whatever it is, it needs to hit them hard in their pocket. So I've heard a couple of comments saying, well, you know, it's not really fair to the landlords. They can't afford those fines. That's the point. Either pay the fine or if you can't afford the fine, then keep your house in order. With that being said, there are many seniors that are being verbally abused that I know of. We're being told, as Kristen said, to move. If you don't like it, go in your house and close your windows. And what seems to be getting lost here is that we are, in fact, a community. We have seniors, we have schools, we have churches, we have a quality of life up until about 5-7 years ago. So with that being said, we kind of need to look at the police response as well. Captain Boyle at C6 and his team are, in my opinion, the best house in the city that I've seen in a long time. They are in fact responsive, but again, their hands are being tied insofar as what they're able to do to break up these parties and to address the issues. So why can't we have a dedicated party car from Friday through Sunday? And it can start at, 6 at night till 6 in the morning. We need to kind of look outside the box, but that does in fact have to be funded. So where's that money going to come from? We need to find it within the budget. As I've said a million times, South Boston is the cash cow of the city of Boston, but we don't have services. So I think that that would be a great idea if we could look into that, because laws need to be enforced. We can put anything we want on the books, but until there's enforcement, nothing's going to happen. So with that, I'm going to end with one final statement. How did South Boston get this way for this issue? We need to go back and look at zoning, look at bedroom counts, because that's what developers are looking at, just bedroom counts. And insofar as raising the fines, I don't believe we need to go to the State House to do it. We raised parking fines without going to the State House. I believe it should be within the city's power to increase those fines on their own. But thank you very much, Councilor Flynn, Flaherty, and the members of the City Council.
Thank you. Thank you, Luann. I want to go next to Julie. Julie, can you unmute yourself and then you should be able to speak? Yeah, Julie, I think you have to unmute yourself. Okay, Julie, one more time. Can you unmute yourself? You're up next. Okay, Natalie Butler. Natalie, you're up next. Hi, Natalie.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much to all the elected officials and the public servants who have been working on this problem. The problems that we're discussing today have been amplified since the pandemic, but it's not happening exclusively in South Boston. It's happening all over the city of Boston. The extreme noise disturbances stemming from the houses and backyard patios. It's escalated because of the COVID restrictions, but personally, we've started noticing it in 2019. The Boston Police Department has records of all the 911 calls and has been accumulating data for South Boston, at least, and probably across the city for community services through the community services offices. And that information is obtained at the discretion of the BPD on a need-to-know basis going forward, I believe. But from a regular person's perspective, we can't tell if the landlords have been spoken with. We know that there's been serious increased communication. Councilors Flynn and Flaherty, Boston Police Department, ISD, many concerned constituents have been working, trying to get this crisis under control. I would echo everything that mayso, Kristen, and Luann have said. I think they eloquently were able to identify what the problems are. In my personal experience, and I sent a long email to the city councilors and forwarded it to all the districts. the parties start at 12 o'clock on Saturday, well, Thursday night, of course, but they escalate on Saturday. Drinking, foul language, excessively loud music played, public urination in their own backyards, as well as on people's front yards and on going up the street. And as far as the excessive loud music and measuring it, there is a decibel app that you can have on your phone, because I have downloaded it. And you can have bursts of 100 to 110 decibels, which is actually enough to do damage to your ears, but is totally unacceptable on a sustained basis from a party that could go on till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We have worked with C6 Community Service through last year. November, we were able to have Sergeant McNeil come out, Officer McNeil come out and speak directly with one house. I won't go into it, but there were public sex acts that were happening in front of the windows. Very disturbing events, and the police were able to become directly involved, speak with the landlord. They were able to get community service to give out warnings, and that has stopped, thank God, but it went up until April of this year. Public health violations, the trash maintenance, disposal at several of these properties has been non-existent. These tenants don't seem to think that it's their job to take the trash out, or to, at what we say in our house, bend at the waist to pick up trash when they drop it. Rats have been increased in this particular neighborhood. I'm treating this property as much as I can, but they seem to be feeding them in other nearby properties, which is, the problem will continue to escalate out of control. ISD has come in, thank God for ISD and the Boston police. They've come in and given violations. And one house, the violation was blowing up the street, and a local neighbor, one got it and brought it back to the house. So I echo the fact that the tenants don't seem to care. They have a lack of respect. They don't seem to feel that there are any consequences. The behavior has been normalized in this neighborhood, and that is part of the problem. They're not, they're contemptuous of the laws and the regulations that are in place. They don't seem to apply to them in their own minds. We've had problems with fire. I've had to call fire prevention because there are visible fire in fire pits, but they have it right up against a wooden fence, or they have the grill right up against the house and the black soot is on the back of the house. The fire prevention has come out. I've requested for them to educate the tenants, not necessarily to fine them. I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade here, but they have to understand basic fire prevention rules, basic public health rules in terms of picking up trash and public urination and public defecation. I think passing the fines on to the landlords is really the only way to get their attention. They're renting out these properties for huge amounts of money. Obviously, their bottom line is very important to them. The tenants don't seem to care what happens to most of the property. And I think that the noise levels, the decibel levels, especially when you do have a whole house, all 3 floors going at the same time, is just totally unacceptable. The foot traffic is very loud. We had problems with the neighbor next door. He thought we called on him last Halloween. We actually didn't. We could hear the police sirens racing back and forth. We were not going to add to their already heavy workload. So we didn't call on the police, but this tenant banged on our door at 11:15 at night with his acquaintance and started with us about why we called the police. And he advanced up the stairs. My husband was there. We no masks. It's in the middle of COVID. We thought it must have been an emergency for somebody to bang on the door. He advanced up the stairs and we had to close the door on him. And we now monitor the premises. We're lucky to be able to do that electronically. But there are many senior citizens who are, I'm hearing they're 80 years old. They probably aren't even using a computer to the extent that the rest of us are. They're wedged in between these party houses. Retaliation against calling 911 is a real, true fear for people. I
Yeah.
don't want these people to come bang on my door again. So increasing the fines. And I'd also say maybe there's a way to pass on the administrative fees for the police who do have to respond. If there is another car or another unit that is set up to respond, maybe they get the fine and they get the administrative fees. If you pull a fire alarm in one of the smaller towns around here and there's no fire, that cost gets passed on to you. I don't see why we couldn't figure out a way to pass the police response time onto some of these landlords. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everything you've done, Council Flynn, Council Flaherty. The police department has been really outstanding, and they respond when they can. And we all understand that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Natalie. You had very good comments, and Natalie mentioned also, not only is this quality of life, but it's also pest control related issues. I've had a hearing on pest control, on illegal dumping, on garbage, on street cleaning. These are the nuts and bolts in basic city services, but this is what city government is all about. Everybody can be a big thinker in the city if they want to be, but we need elected officials that want to address the quality of life issues that are impacting residents in the neighborhoods of Boston. Natalie mentioned, some of the older people being harassed for calling 911. I know that's true. There was an older gentleman who was actually a Korean War veteran who is disabled from his service, serving overseas for our country in the U.S. Army. He called the police, and the young people down in his apartment above him or below him, banged on his door, the same thing that they did to you, Natalie. And here's a guy, 88 years old, almost 90 years old, serving in one of the worst wars that we've ever been in. Lucky to come back, and we have a young punks, not from South Boston, giving him a hard time. It's outrageous. Let me go to SGD. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. SGDs. You're up next. You have your hand up.
Okay, hi, Ed.
Hi.
Hi, Ed, it's Sheila Green. I'm sorry, I don't know why I have initials.
Oh, okay. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, okay. Good morning, Councilor Edwards and Councilor Flynn and Flaherty. Really, thank you for leading this morning's hearing. We are now in the 5th year, maybe 7th year into the problem of party houses in South Boston, and 3 years of meetings and discussions. Meanwhile, the chaos continues in our community. The truculent behavior of 20 to 30-something-year-olds is increasing and menacing, as you have heard through 5 or 6 people witnessing now, threatening our elders and wreaking havoc throughout our community. Yet these 20-something-year-olds are not held accountable, and there are no consequences. Last August, ISD, community leaders, and BPD put together a plan to focus on these problem houses. However, the problem continues to balloon. Station 6, Captain Boyle, are really magnificent, and we are very lucky to have them. We have a great working relationship with them. However, they're stretched covering the territory from Mass Cass, 3 major housing developments, over to Columbia Point, UMass, and everything in between. And then when there's trouble on the seaport, who's called? Boston police officers, Station 6. They do their job well, doing an amazing job with a limited staff available to them. ISD has also done a great job responding to the community as well. But again, a limited staff to really cover these territories and these problems. However, it's not enough of an impact to change the situation, because when one group moves out, another moves in, and it's the same old, same old. The parties start on Thursday night and roll into Monday morning. Saturday and Sunday afternoons we are all subjected to backyards full of sloppy, loud, out of control drunks, and where the decibel level is way beyond 70. So here are some recommendations that some of us have come up with, hopefully towards a permanent solution. Number one, change the housing codes. Unfortunately, Boston housing codes have not kept up. Loopholes in the codes need to be closed up. For example, landlords are allowed to rent a 5-room apartment as a 5-bedroom apartment, charging $5,000 on up a month. This is coded as a rooming house and illegal in residential sections in most of Massachusetts, but not in Boston. That needs to change. Two, I was only focusing on the South Boston problem, so Eastie, forgive me. We recommended to raise the fines to a minimum of $3,000 regarding the landlords. When we first suggested this, Councilor Flynn very thoughtfully was hesitant because his concerns were the other parts of the city couldn't afford it. And he's right, I agree. Hence, we recommended the creation of a pilot program in the 02127 area, because these landlords can afford a hefty fine and they won't like it. But I guarantee party houses will drop significantly. In 2015, Charlestown created a pilot program for parking on street cleaning days and raised the tickets to $90. The cost for the rest of the city is $40. So a pilot program can be had. 3, funding for the Boston Police and funding for ISD for more staff. PTD, traffic. Why aren't we ticketing in South Boston on Sundays? And we need more enforcement for Saturday nights and Friday nights. And the second thing is, we need to change the criteria for residential parking. These kids are rolling in, they're getting residential parking. So you've got a 5-room apartment, that's 5 more cars. That needs to be dealt with and it needs to be changed.
Well,
I agree totally with Councilor Edwards. The noise ordinance, that has to be changed. It has to be looked at, it has to be changed. So in conclusion, councilors, these landlords and partiers, they're not your constituents and they don't vote. Everyone here today and the neighbors we represent are your constituents and we all vote. I thank you, Councilor Flynn, you're doing a great job. Councilor Flaherty also, and I really thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sheila. It was a very good call. And Sheila, I think you're right, Sheila. We're in the middle of a city council at large election. We're in the middle of a mayoral election. Are candidates going to focus on quality of life issues? That's up to you as residents to tell them what your priorities are, not to let them tell you what their priorities are. You need to ask them what their position is on quality of life issues, pest control, water and sewer, clean streets, house parties, litter, trash, fixed sidewalks. That's the nuts and bolts of city government. If those don't work for residents, nothing works for residents. So it's up to me, but it's also up to the residents that you have the opportunity over the next several months to ask difficult questions to ask fair questions, I should say, to elected officials about what their plans are on quality of life issues. Having said that, I mentioned in my opening statement that I want to ask Chris English this question. I didn't take an opportunity to ask questions, but Chris, I'm advocating for the creation of a specific point person with the city to act as a liaison with the Boston Police Inspectional Services, Office of Neighborhood Services, the Problem Property Task Force, and elected officials. And I envision this position accumulating the data coming from neighbors to all relevant offices, providing helpful information to neighbors, sending warning notices to landlords and tenants, and helping to check against our master problem properties list to see if this behavior requires further action. You know, I would like to see us be more structured and more focused on specifics on how we're organizing our city efforts and time on problem properties and dealing with this issue. So my focus is to get a specific person, you know, that coordinates this important quality of life issue and works together with residents and coordinates this response. What do you think, Chris?
I think it's a great idea. I would say that the Problem Properties Task Force, as it stands, has all of those agencies that you just mentioned sitting on it and meeting regularly. ISD, the police department, neighborhood services, 311, the fire department. We have our legal team. We have our neighborhood development team. We have code enforcement that's sitting on it. It is really the centralized group that deals specifically with these issues. I think we have that infrastructure there to sort of coordinate our response that way. So I would say we continue to utilize the task force there, and we can definitely have somebody on the task force act as sort of the public liaison, if you will, if that would be helpful for the council and for the residents.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Chris, this is budget season. Is that plan, does it have the necessary funding? If it doesn't have the necessary funding, I want to see money in the budget to deal with that. And if it's not in there, I may not vote again. I may not vote for the budget, but I want to know, do you have enough money in the budget to accomplish that task? And if you don't, let me know, and I'll advocate for you with Mayor Janey and her team to get that money in the budget, because I'll make sure that money gets in the budget.
Certainly. The task force itself is a budget neutral activity. It's all part of the regular duties of those agencies and the staff members that are on it. So it doesn't have a dedicated budget. But certainly I think exploring resources for the task force is something that we can definitely do.
Thank you. Sheila mentioned in her comments basically talking about another issue that we really haven't even discussed is the jurisdiction of C6. And she's exactly right. It goes basically from the Joe Moakley Courthouse at the South Boston waterfront. It goes up to South Boston, Fort Point. It hits Mass Ave, Albany Street, Southampton Street area. It goes to Columbia Point, Harbor Point, I should say, Andrew Square, where we're having a lot of challenges. Geographically, it's one of the biggest areas in the city. And over the last 15 years, 20 years, the population of this area, my district, has grown significantly. So that's also a consideration. I don't know, Superintendent, we just went through the US Census count, and I was part of that working group counting everybody in the city. But I know my district, especially in the downtown area, has grown significantly. I know it's not part of C6, but at some point, Superintendent, do they factor in what the new jurisdiction lines will be based on the new US Census and/or crime stats?
Council, we really haven't had an opportunity to add officers at the pace that the district has grown. As you mentioned, with the seaport in particular, and obviously some of the attention that the Mass Ave corridor has needed over the years, and the expansion of the South Bay Mall. There's a lot of activity, which I think is a great thing for the city. Everyone wants to see economic development, and everyone wants to see a city that's doing well. But we just don't have the people to add to the districts, and depending on which groups you listen to, so some people think we have too many officers and they want to defund the police. I've heard abolish the police. I've heard a lot of different things, but it's been generally static, give or take 100 or so officers. So, we do, as I mentioned, have an academy class coming out early next month, but the reality is we're barely, if even, keeping pace with the officers we're losing. We are losing officers at an elevated pace due to a variety of factors, not the least of which is the environment relative to policing. So that's the challenges we're going to face. We do have plans for a couple of academy classes to at least keep pace, but that remains to be seen. But to illustrate your point, we have 72 police officers assigned to C6, which might sound adequate until you factor in that it's 3 shifts. There are days off, so there are various squads. So by the time you figure out how many officers are working on a given shift, it's pretty thin. We do, I don't know if we get credit for it to the extent that we should, but we do a lot with what we have. We have some really hardworking police officers. We have some bosses that are out there making sure that things are getting done to the best of our ability. We're not perfect by any means, nor do we claim to be, but the reality is, I think if people understood the personnel that we have to apply to some of these problems, I think they'd be impressed with what we're able to accomplish with the numbers that we have. So, yeah, your point is well taken. It's grown. C6 in particular has grown. I don't know if exponentially, but certainly significantly, and we really haven't added police officers to keep pace with those numbers.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. I agree with you. The professionalism of the C6 team is exceptional, and their response to the residents, especially during this difficult year, has been very, very professional. So I want to acknowledge Captain Boyle's team, and I have the opportunity probably speaking to Captain Boyle at least 3 or 4 times a week. And I talked to Captain Sweeney, who's in the South End, which I represent, and I speak to Captain Ciolo at A1, who represents downtown Boston and Chinatown area. Having said that, there's one more question, and then I'm going to ask Councilor Edwards if she would like to ask any questions or to give a final comment. So, Councilor Edwards, would you like to either give a final comment or a question, or?
Sorry about that.
That's
Phone
okay.
call came through. My final thoughts are simply that I really appreciate the back and forth. The suggestions from the community about what we can do are huge, and I hope you have a working session, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Flaherty, literally on city ordinance reform that we can have. I know I was muted, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
City ordinance reform that we need to have, reflecting the realities of our city getting more dense. And in many cases, as one of the constituents noted, having out individual rooms being rented out, that's an issue I know in Austin and Brighton. That's an issue that's growing in East Boston. I do think, I've heard enough people and I'm really happy. I just proposed the 9 o'clock. It looked like that was kind of a suggested conversation. I don't know if Chris can confirm or someone can confirm it. That's something we can do unilaterally. We don't really need to go to the State House. I don't think so for that. And then, but increasing the fines, especially if it's over $300, you probably do have to go to the state. Okay. So let's really have the working session on what we can do and get done. I wanted to also note with outdoor dining, right, happening. The issue of parking enforcement is becoming quite prevalent, and the North End especially. We're looking for the weekend enforcement and night enforcement as well, because I think it's really important that the city can demonstrate it can handle infrastructure. If we're going to have outdoor dining, we need to show that we can still, like, we have the enforcement infrastructure to meet the growing needs. So I just appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Flaherty. Thank you, Chris, and I think it was Superintendent McGoldrick was on as well.
Yeah.
Yes, and I apologize if I missed any other of the city workers from ISD or the police department, but I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. I have to go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Your comments were very good. You provided great updates and great leadership on this issue. And just for the residents, Councilor Edwards is the chair of government operations, where if we did propose something, it would go to her committee. So I just want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards for her important work on quality of life issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I have one more hand up. I'll take this gentleman and then maybe we'll give final comments. JIG.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're up, sir.
Hi, thank you. Firstly, thank you for putting this meeting together. And thank you for ISD and BPD for what you are able to do. I live in Roxborough in the Fort Hill area. And, you know, everything that's been said beforehand by other residents is all true here as well. I don't know how things are in the South End or other areas, but what we've seen here recently is an influx of students from Northeastern making their way into rental properties, and especially where I live, right next to Lambert Park, you know, a triple decker that's, again, technically being leased individually, but obviously it's been turned into a frat house. And I don't want to sort of rehash all the problems that have already been said, because, you know, they apply here as well. But I think to everyone's point, I think these tenants either don't care, or if the current fines are passed on to them, you know, when your parents are basically paying $70,000 plus a year, a few $100s split amongst how many are squatting in a building isn't much. And so I think whatever sort of fines and other solutions we come up with, it really has to be aimed directly at the property owners, who for the most part are absent, especially in our case here, where we've sent email after email after email, and all we get is canned responses back from the property management company. And so whatever we do really needs to hit them hard. I don't, you know, some of these property owners are making quite a pretty penny on it. And I don't know if, you know, a certain amount is enough to really hit their wallet in their fiscal year, but maybe something along the lines of, you know, a fine that's relative to the amount of money they're making would be enough. I'm not really sure, but again, I think hitting the tenants, which as we've seen are either completely disrespectful to what's going on or can't afford the fines right now, I feel like a zero tolerance policy is required if we are to really sort of nip this in the bud. Again, thank you so much for everything that everyone's doing, and I hope that we can come to a resolution with this.
Thank you, JIG, for the call. Before I give my closing statements, I'm going to ask the Superintendent McGoldrick to offer closing statements, and I'll ask Chris English from ISD. I just wanted to highlight one issue I know it was mentioned. You know, we lose, Superintendent McGoldrick would know the stats better than I do, but we lose about 100 police officers a year through retirement, maybe more. We need to aggressively hire 200-300. We need to put 200-300 police officers on the street every year just to catch up. And we need to do that consistently for the next 4 or 5 years. Boston police play a critical role in our city. They're professional, they work hard, they understand the neighbors, they live here. And I just want to acknowledge their professionalism, especially over the last couple of years, difficult years, but they play an important role in our city. And you see the response that they are doing, sometimes 500 calls in South Boston a weekend they're responding to, while being on Southampton Street and Mass Ave, Albany Street, dealing with other major issues. So there's a role for Boston Police, there's an important role for inspectional service, there's a role for residents to play. And what's important is we continue to work together during these difficult times. I acknowledge the difficult times, and they might not get better immediately. We might be in for a rocky road, but what's important is I'm gonna be here. I don't go away during the summer. I'm gonna be at my house in South Boston, responding to constituent calls, working with the police, working with inspectional services, working with my neighbors, talking to my neighbors, trying to get things done. So just want to say thank you to my residents in South Boston, especially. I want to say thank you to Councilor Flaherty and his team. I want to say thank you to Superintendent McGoldrick and the Boston Police, and Captain Boyle and C6, Chris English, and all the professional workers at Inspectional Services. The Mayor's office, Haley Dillon's done a great job as well. Civic organizations also. So though that's my closing statement, I'm going to ask Mr. Chris English to go next. Chris.
Counselor, I just want to thank you for inviting me here. I think there was a lot of really good discussion, some great suggestions from residents. I think moving forward, we'll continue to try to improve the way we respond to the quality of life issues. Hopefully we can all work together, both on a policy and a legislative front, but also sort of just operationally out in the neighborhoods to make sure that, residents feel heard and that we're addressing the issues as they arise. And we'll continue working really closely with our great colleagues over at BPD to make sure that this summer is enjoyable for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I also want to acknowledge and say thank you to City Council Central staff, including Juan and Kerry. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Kerry, for exceptional work today. Having said that, Superintendent McGoldrick, would you like to offer closing statements?
Thank you for your leadership on this, Counselor. There's, obviously the police are never going to be the solution to any of these problems all by ourselves. It's community events like this and getting people engaged that I think will allow us to become part of the solution in a more effective way. But we really do need the community's help. Just to raise one issue, just so people aren't concerned about calling the police. There's another statute that it's only a $50 fine, but that can be used before 11 p.m. If something's over 70 decibels before 11 p.m., we can give them a $50 fine. The larger fines, you do have to wait till 11, but don't feel like you have to wait till 11 p.m. to call the police. We have a lesser fine, a lesser ordinance that we can use. So we will respond. I hope people don't feel like, even though we may have calls stacked up and it may take us some time, we recognize what this means to the community. We don't feel like this is a waste of our time or policing that we don't need to do. We recognize if it's important to the community, it's important to us. So we do have that additional tool. Again, it's only a $50 fine, but sometimes it's an eye opener for people. And it also, that particular ordinance, where it is a little bit of a lesser ordinance, does not require us to have a decibel monitor or anything like that. We can, if it's audible to us from, I think it's 100 yards away or 300 feet. I forget how the ordinance actually listed, but if we can hear it within a certain defined distance, then we can go ahead and cite the person, and we'll do that. So there's a few different things we have at our disposal. If you know a place is going to become a problem and it's early, and you don't want to wait till 11 o'clock to call, or it might be an hour before we get there, call us sooner. Call us at 7 p.m. And if there's a real significant party going on with enough noise that we can justify applying that lesser ordinance, then we can give people the heads up that the neighbors are upset with them, and hopefully people listen to that, and we could also issue the somewhat smaller fine. But I appreciate everyone's support for these activities. But we're trying to respond to what the community feels is important, and hopefully we'll have a quieter summer than we had last summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Chris English, and thank you to my South Boston neighbors. I wanted to wish everybody a safe and healthy weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend. It's a time that we remember the fallen men and women that gave their life to our country. And we remember our Gold Star families. We acknowledge their pain and suffering, and we want to say a prayer to ourselves for their family, for their sacrifice and their service. This isn't a weekend about partying and cookouts and drinking beer. It's about remembering our fallen men and women that gave their life for our country. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining this meeting. Bye-bye.